Hola, Minasan! Welcome back for another round of BattleTech Mech Warrior research. We're continuing on with the First Secession War, Eternal Dishonour, most dishonorable. Sven been to playing channel once more. You'll find the links down in the description below. Last time we saw, everybody was getting nuked. Fleets have been decimated and sent back to the space equivalent of the Stone Age, and thus space travel has become limited. And everybody's trying to get that sweet, succulent JSDLF, Japan's self-defense laws. Japan's self-defense lord. The Star League Defense Force, SLDF, Japan. I got Japan on the brain, everybody. I think we all know I want some Gundam going on. The Star League Defense Force tech has now become a hot commodity, and everybody's blowing up planets and nuking people into oblivion in order to get that tech. So now, according to Sven Vanderplank, everything is supposed to settle down, and it's just going to be normalized skirmishes leading up to the Massacre of Kantari. Something that I wanted to research, but he's going to cover it, thankfully, and we'll get to see what that was all about and why that was such a bad thing. So, get your notes together for my post-research thoughts. This is called to action. Comment, like, subscribe, follow, hit the notification button, and let us resume the research. Woo! Look at that. Look at them towers of dead. And I was told that that's not even all of it.
The death of Archon Jennifer Steiner
Yes.
threw the fledgling Lyran offensive, and indeed the entire realm, into complete disarray. No orders were received by the advancing regiments within the first month of her passing, allowing the Draconis Combine and Free Worlds League time to mount a counterattack, reclaiming all but Judone. 3 days before her passing, another assault force had arrived to reclaim Wyatt, but those two worlds would become the sum total of the Lyran offensive. The Estates General promptly moved to have her son Richard confirmed as the Commonwealth's new Archon. He immediately set about reorganizing the Lyran High Command. His uncle Paul Steiner remained the general of the armies, but he was functionally removed from command. Control of the Curitan Theatre was given over to the Duke of Kars, Graham Kelswa. This shake-up took time, and throughout 2791, the Combine was able to seize another 4 worlds.
Damn! Combine just went in. Look at that.
The only Lyran commander who managed to maintain some momentum was Commandant General Hasseldorf. His raiding campaign had to be scaled back as Richard reassigned his jump ships and warships to other locations on the front, but he was nevertheless able to force the Bolan defenders off Danshan and liberate the recently conquered Raderstov.
Alright, so they were getting some back from the Bolan drum.
The Draconis Combine campaign against the Federated Suns had also completely ground to a halt as they struggled to move reserve jump ships to the front in the wake of the Battle of Shalam. Throughout 2791, they made no further advances there. John Davian was glad of the reprieve and took the opportunity to rebuild his battered military using industrial assets seized in the name of the state. The only person making significant moves in 2791 was Kenyon Marek. On his push towards Sana, he took Elnath, Ibstock, and Park Place. Orient claimed Sappho, and the Duchy of
there's a planet called Park Place?
by a full 11 systems. 2 more Seacav regiments were destroyed in the bargain. The Eagle's progress may not have been as bombastic as that of Jinjiro Kirita, but his campaign showed no signs of slowing. The only great loss for Marek came when his 12-year-old grandson Ward was shockingly assassinated.
Oh.
The culprit was never determined, but there was now one fewer in the line of succession between Fleet Admiral Thaddeus and his father, the Captain General. As the number of displaced citizens and refugees continued to soar, an enormous effort was undertaken by Comstar, who created the Archives branch to help trace their movement and families across the Inner Sphere. In time, this became a repository for not just genetic history, but also many lost technologies and records. Access to the Comstar archives is strictly controlled. Only the highest officials in the Order are aware of the full breadth of secrets contained within. With the Lyran Commonwealth Armed Forces still restructuring in 2792, the Free Worlds League military went on the offensive again around the Bolan Thumb region. However, these attacks showed the LCAF was becoming a much stronger foe than they had previously contended with. On Gypsum, the invaders were driven back, and worse, the assault force sent to SYOSETSU were wiped out by the Lyran guards in garrison. Only on Alula Borealis did they successfully wrestle away a planet from House Steiner's Iron Fist. With Amaric's primary focus on the Capellan Confederation, they did little more than launch raids against the Lyran border for the next few years.
Dang, yo. The Lyrans really got screwed heavily here. Losing Jennifer Steiner, they've just been nothing but forced into defensive campaigns and just started losing so many planets. And then to make matter, and not only that, but it's getting even worse for the others. Like for the other factions, Maric lost his grandson, one of his successors, and just making things even worse for the elite. You know, for the lords, for the lords. Though good on Comstar for creating archives so that refugees and could be traced and history doesn't get lost, including technologies and so on. This is it's already it's already been a disaster, but it's just going down and down. I wonder how they're going to be able to find that light at the end of the tunnel kind of thing. They probably might not at the end.
In the Federated Suns, House Davian was finally trying to recapture some of the initiative over the stalled Kuritan advance. From the Capellan end of the front, they squeezed the Kurita Bulge, primarily focusing on systems within the Marlette combat region, but also taking a couple from as far away as the Robinson operational area. Their victory was short-lived, as later that year, the Draconis Combine finally resumed its crushing conquest of the Davian
I still love
state.
that image.
They began by retaking the lost Marlette systems, and then immediately followed up by moving towards the capital, New Avalon. Faced with both reinforced defenses in every system and a shortage of jump ships to maneuver his forces, Jinjiro abandoned the planet-hopping strategy that had served him so well earlier in the war.
Really?
Instead, he focused on completely subjugating or destroying each new world he reached before moving on. Progress was much slower, but the occupation forces had to contend with far fewer insurrections. The Commonwealth Navy in 2792 was busy redeploying from the former Rimworld's border to more active fronts. By this point, the Lyran Intelligence Corps was reporting that only one credible threat remained within the periphery, the Finnmark Free Republic. It was here that Richard Steiner next turned his gaze. A squadron of corvettes was broken off and tasked with the destruction of the Roe Weapons Systems warship yard at Finnmark. General of the armies Paul Steiner advocated for a ground campaign that would allow them to take possession of the former Amaris capital system, but Richard was only interested in extermination. Operation Haifischflossensuppe began that December. The assault squadron moved first to Dijon, claiming the world for the Commonwealth. They then appeared at the capital's zenith. The Lyran Commodore in charge of the operation demanded their surrender as they approached the shipyards, refusing any calls for a diplomatic solution. As the Marine boarding party landed on the orbital station, the former Rimwelders detonated a nuclear device on board.
Of course!
Several more launched from the planet itself, destroying a pair of the Lyran warships before they were able to withdraw. An hour later, the Lyran squadron returned and unleashed their full strategic arsenal on Finnmark, and didn't relent in their bombardment until the following day, by which point the entire population had been exterminated. Another two worlds of the now defunct Republic were absorbed into the Commonwealth, but the rest were left to rot.
Wow.
The shortage of transports available to Commandant General Hasseldorf meant his Bowl and Thumb campaign progressed only at a very slow pace following Richard's rise to power. Fewer and fewer raids were taking place, and only a single planet changed hands in 2793, where once more the Bolan defenders fought until the last mech fell. Kenyon Maddox's assault on the Capellan Confederation, by contrast, was much more successful, destroying a regiment of Andurian Hussars and taking a further 8 worlds from House Liao, half of which went to their allies in House Allison and Humphreys. Because of its strategic location right in the middle of the front, an important staging post was established on Anagasaki to support any future advance, but it was here that the campaign began to come undone. Later in the year, a small fleet of Capellan warships arrived in system, making landfall with the Centauri Guards and 3 supporting regiments who quickly moved against the Marek supply depots. The 21st Centauri Lancers Battalion distinguished themselves by rooting out the defenders with a minimum of destruction to the munitions and equipment in storage. It was the first major loss that the Capellan Confederation had given the Free Worlds League since the New Delos massacre. Suspecting that it was the first phase of a much larger counteroffensive, the FWLM quickly changed to the defensive. This hunkering down led to the creation of a new province within the League, the Syrian Concordance. These former hegemony worlds quickly raised a trio of regiments for their provincial brigade, the Syrian Lancers. In reality, there was no follow-up attack planned, but the captured supplies allowed House Liao to fortify the worlds in the Eagle's path.
Did I just see that right? Sol, the homeworld, completely surrounded by all the houses. Now, I was told, of course, that they agreed not to go after Sol, because if any one of them would take it, they will put a mark on their head with the rest of the houses. But it's just horrifying seeing Earth completely surrounded. That whole entire, wow. That's insane that it got to this point where Sol just sits there in the middle, surrounded by all the houses, just like that. Truly the center of the galaxy. That's madness. Capellan turning point. Raiding frenzy.
As 2794 began, the League found itself under pressure from both sides. Hiring a new mercenary regiment went some way to offsetting their recent losses, but their campaign against Liao had completely stalled. They were now being subjected to raiding parties, many of them suicidal in nature, slipping across the border and striking with small tactical nukes at targets of opportunity.
Tactical nukes.
The most severe of these was the attack on the Magna Fusion Products factory on Orient. A pair of detonations razed both the facility and the nearby Cadet Academy. Killed at the base was the heir to the Captain Generalcy, Jason Marek.
Wow.
Kenyon's
Another Marek
firstborn
dead.
and 2 of his grandchildren through Karl had now been killed during the First Succession War.
Wow.
The only attack the Capellan Confederation came under at this time came from a highly irregular source. The Lyran Commonwealth, perhaps suspecting that the facility would soon fall to the Free Worlds League once they resumed their advance, struck the Callan Industries facility on Assumption within the Tikhonov Commonalty in May 2794. Other more conventional raids were launched from the Alarian province against the Bolan Thumb between April and July.
They are determined to get that thumb
in the successful invasion of Elajay. One of the darker chapters to come out of the First Succession War occurred on the planet Strone within the Federated Suns. With the dreaded Draconis Combine fast approaching, the local Prime Minister issued laws that stripped any individual of Asian heritage of their personal property, with the paper-thin justification being that they had a higher probability of spying for Liao or Kurita. This was indicative of a growing wave of racism born primarily from fear that was permeating throughout the Davian realm. The new laws led to a widespread and long-lasting purge in which countless innocents were killed because of their ethnicity.
Damn.
The deaths were all the more senseless as Thrawn lay in the warpath and was taken by the dragon within the year. Even to this day, an anti-Asian sentiment lingers under the surface in some areas of the Federated Suns, though to discuss it openly is often met with derision.
That's gross.
After a few years of rebuilding, the Lyran Commonwealth was finally ready to resume operations against the Draconis Combine. In the years since he came to power, the BattleTech factories on Hesperus and elsewhere in the Commonwealth had been working flat out to try and match the demand. Like everyone, the LCAF was in decline, but their prodigious industrial output allowed them to found several new regiments during the war, including 3 for the Arcturan Guards, 3 for the Donegal Guards, 7 new Lyran regulars, and a second regiment each for the Donegal and Sakhalin regulars. The exact date that they entered into the roles is lost to history, but the first of them would see action within the year. Duke Kelsoir's first offensive in charge of the Curitan front would also prove to be his last. It began promisingly enough, with raids on Dieron and Styx, but things took a turn when Kelsoir accompanied his Tamar Tigers on a deep raid against Benjamin. As the capital of a powerful military district, it would most likely host a large garrison, but spies reported that the system had actually been stripped bare so that those troops might be better used against the Federated Sons. Unfortunately for Steiner, those spies were actually members of the Combine's internal security force and were feeding them false information.
They fell for it.
They waited until the Tigers were entering the atmosphere before they sprang their trap. A trio of destroyers overwhelmed the Lyran warships and then destroyed the jump ships too, stranding Kelsoir on planet. There, he discovered that far from being deserted, Benjamin was still home to 3 mech and 12 conventional regiments. His own battle mechs leapt from the dropships before touching down and dispersed into the countryside, evading capture for the time being. However, those same spies now reported back to the Commonwealth that there had been no survivors of the ambush. The Duke of Kars was on his own. Begrudgingly, Richard was forced to reinstate his uncle Paul as commander of the Curitan Theatre. Over the next 2 years, the Draconis Combine was able to take advantage of the rivalry between the Archon and the General of the Armies, allowing them to seize another 4 systems from House Steiner and destroy one of their mercenary regiments, even as they closed in on New Avalon.
Wow. That's one heck of a fight, the Steiners and the Curitas. I gotta say, it's pretty that's pretty intense. They've been swapping lands, planets, between each other, and doing some serious damage to each other. But they seem to be pretty even on both sides. The fact that the planet Strong reduced itself to some of the most horrific racism imaginable. I'm surprised they didn't go full Holocaust on the Asians and living on there. It's very gross, man, to know that. Well, story wise, I mean, it's good story wise from a writing perspective. Yes, what I'm saying, things like that does happen because history has shown that it can happen. But the way they presented it and put that on display in narrative is pretty horrifying. It's pretty horrifying,
2795 saw the rise of one of the Capellan Confederation's great wartime leaders, Duke of Sirius and Prefect of the Tikhonov Commonalty, Sandal Quinn. As the Draconis Combine drew nearer to their ultimate goal, they passed by the Chesterton worlds that bordered the Liao state. Such planets were of little interest to them, but far more historically significant to the Confederation.
Morale.
The AFFS had little in the region to repel them as they continued to fortify their capital. The only new unit to appear in that corner of the front was Belinda's Irregulars a couple of years prior. Another mercenary brigade entering service with the Federated Sons in 2795 was the Fighting Urukai, but they were desperately needed elsewhere. Quinn didn't have the authority to bypass the Strategios, but instead called upon the mercenaries of the region to conduct his private war. He also raised a new brigade from scratch, the Chesterton Voltigeurs. In April, his assault began with landings on Castleton and Mirag. After securing those systems in the name of Tikhonov, the Duke next took aim at Farwell and Demeter that August. The Ariana Grenadiers aided him in his attack on the home of the Arcadian Cuirassiers, their first outing since the disastrous campaign on Tirfing had almost destroyed the regiment. Farwell fell after just a few weeks, while the garrison on Demeter held out for 4 months. Losing the Tamar Tigers on Benjamin halted whatever plans the Lyran Commonwealth Armed Forces had made for 2795. Once again, the only commander making moves that year was Eric Hasseldorf. Beginning in September, he launched raids against Kamenz and Tilarska and drove the Marek militia off Lohburg by the end of November. The Free Worlds League, meanwhile, was still anticipating a counterattack from the Capellan Confederation, fortifying the worlds seized from Liao. The Callaway Lancers Planetary Guard, who had seen action during the ill-fated Second Strike by Task Force Devlin, pulled together to form a new mercenary regiment in service to House Marik. The Chancellor and her Strategios were indeed drawing up plans for a liberation campaign, aimed at both the Duchy of Andurian and the Kori salient. They began by taking Berenson, the first League planet to fall to the Capellans since Zion at the war's outset.
Wow.
Any further ambitions the Confederation had went up in smoke, however, as on November 18th, Barbara Liao passed away from a rare blood disorder.
Oh.
Her 12-year-old granddaughter, Ilsa Liao, was next in line to the throne.
That's tough.
At the dawn of 2796, Jinjiro Kurita's campaign against the Federated Suns was reaching a crescendo. In the last 3 years, they had taken a further 19 worlds from the Crucis March, destroying 3 more AFFS regiments, and were now only a single jump from their ultimate objective.
They're about to get
New
it.
Avalon. As the homeworld of House Davian and the center of what at one time was considered the strongest of the successor states, the planet was heavily defended. A series of reconnaissance missions early in the year revealed the scale of the challenge that lay ahead. Nevertheless, the Draconis Combine was poised and ready to strike. When Coordinator Minoru Kurita called for a 3-month halt to the campaign, he did so over the express wishes of his son Jinjiro. Any delay at this stage only gave Davian more time to prepare, the Warlord of Galadin argued. Historians have proposed many fanciful ideas as to why Minoru paused the advance, such as giving Davian a final chance to ready themselves being in line with his personal code of Bushido, to the suggestion that the 91-year-old coordinator had simply grown tired of the killing. The reality is likely less romantic. The battle for New Avalon would almost certainly become the longest and bloodiest of the succession wars so far. Minoru believed that it was vital that his troops were adequately rested before commencing the operation, and that the Combine supply lines were secure. Several insurrections still raged within occupied territory, and an opportunistic strike at New Roads in January had caused further disruption. In Kuritan society, each aspect of the state is reflected by one of 5 pillars: gold, ivory, steel, teak, and jade. Ivory, for example, represented both religion and philosophy, and through them, purity and harmony. For decades, it had been the tradition of the elite Sword of Light Brigade to adopt one of these pillars as their moniker. The 6th Sword Regiment was known as the Ivory Dragon, and together with their coordinator, they were headed towards the embattled world of Kintari 4, arriving in June. The AFFS regiment on planet had spent years operating behind enemy lines, defeating every attempt the garrison forces made to catch them. The arrival of Minoru's elites looked as if it would turn the tables, and by early August, the Crucis Lancers had been cornered within the Carmelite Mountains. The coordinator found the natural beauty of the region captivating, and so while the majority of his force closed on their suspected location, Minoru dismounted to contemplate the stunning vistas before him. From a vantage point above the town, the Successor Lord was being watched by Sergeant Latha Pischel of the AFFS.
Oh, he's gonna get assassinated?
He had no idea who his target was, other than someone important based off his personal bodyguard and the presence of a Buddhist monk. Not knowing the consequences of his actions, the sniper took the shot, and on August 9th, 2786, Minoru Kurita was killed on Kintari 4.
Wow. Wow. Chance of counter. Sniper took out. Let me just make sure I get his name correctly. The sniper's name. I just want to make sure I get the sniper's name correctly here, everybody. I don't want to.
From a vantage point above the town, the Successor Lord was being watched by Sergeant Latha
Pischel. I want to make sure because this is very important, and I don't want to screw this one up. Latha Pischel assassinated Minoru Kurita. Yeah, because it was Kurita, that started this whole mess, and to be taken out by a sniper That's crazy. Sniped Minoru Kurita. Man, and Kurita is a successor lord, so that's a big deal. Let's make sure that we don't screw that one up.
Gel of the AFFS. He had no idea who his target was, other than someone important based off his personal bodyguard and the presence of a Buddhist monk. Not knowing the consequences of his actions, the sniper took the shot, and on August 9th, 2786, Minoru Kurita was killed on Kintari 4.
Wow.
The Draconis Combine
Kintari
mustard soldiery
4
exploded into activity. When the FedSun's Department of Military Intelligence deciphered some of these communications, they were shocked to learn what had happened. They understood full well that the death of Minoru meant his son would take up his mantle.
Oh, damn.
They feared what sort of retribution an enraged Jinjiro would unleash. Acting to prevent the extermination of so loyal a unit, jump ships were dispatched from Sonya to collect the Cruce's lancers,
So that's...
evacuating most of the survivors of a years-long resistance campaign on August 28th.
Oh my gosh, so that's the Kintari...
When word reached Jinjiro's headquarters that his father had been killed, his aide dispatched a lowly Talon sergeant to tell him the terrible news, certain that the first man who approached would be cut to pieces.
Damn.
Instead, Jinjiro thanked him for his honesty, and commanded his deputy to commit seppuku for his cowardice.
Wow.
He departed for Kintari at once, flanked by the second Sword of Light, the Steel Dragon, representing the military might of the Draconis Combine. When he arrived on September 11th, 2796, he gathered the assembled officers on World and gave what is perhaps the most infamous order of the Succession Wars: kill them all. Any who refused were summarily executed themselves. The DCMS began by rounding up the entire population of Corinda City over 2 days, herding them into the Central Park, and then opening fire on the mass of civilians.
Wow.
100,000 were gunned down in just a few minutes. From there, they spread out across the planet's surface, bringing death and destruction to every major city and town on Kintari. At first, the Combine soldiers went about the slaughter dispassionately, waiting for word from Jinjiro that enough blood had been spilled. They reasoned with themselves that because the killer of the coordinator had fled, they had left the civilians to take their place on the executioner's block.
Oh.
When days turned to weeks, turned to months, and still the carnage had not ended, those same soldiers took on a different mindset. Some began to waver in their duty, a few even risking their lives to hide survivors. Any who were discovered to be concealing prisoners were killed by the new coordinator's personal guard, the Otomo. But many others took to treating the locals as vermin to be exterminated, and grew ever more brutal in their methods. By year's end, supplies and munitions had been virtually exhausted. Morale was in tatters. Soldiers were committing all sorts of atrocities on any Kintarans they stumbled upon, and yet still Jinjiro did not relent. The officers took to killing civilians by hand, using their once ceremonial swords to behead innocents by the hundreds, if not thousands. The deaths also spread to the rolls of the Draconis Combine, as many were so shamed by their own actions they could no longer live with themselves. The once proud ivory dragon, which had represented the spirituality and ethics of House Kurita, had been permanently and irreparably tarred by the events unfolding.
Wow.
In the new year, the unit was disbanded, and those who didn't abandon the Combine altogether were folded into the reformed First Sword of Light. Jinjiro seemed to revel in the carnage, attending many of the executions in person, and forbidding those present to use any means but the sword to dispatch their victims. Even the pleading of the Buddhist monk who had been witness to his father's death did not move him, except to reach for his own sword so that he could cut the man down. Eventually, it proved too much for some of his enraged staff to bear. The Comstar administrator, Nolan Mordiki, had been under house arrest at their HBG station since the genocide began, cut off from events beyond his walls. In early 2797, the defecting crew of one of Kurita's mobile HQs leaked footage of the massacre to them. Comstar then spread news of events on Kintari across the network. The citizens of the Inner Sphere, who were mostly kept in the dark about the brutality of the raging conflict, were utterly appalled at the barbarity of House Kurita, none more so than those within the Federated Suns. More than any other event in the past 10 years of fighting, Kintari galvanized the populace. They could not tolerate even one more world falling to the dragon, and unrest within the occupied systems skyrocketed. Remember Kintari became the watchword of 1,000 resistance movements. The Draconis Combine mustered soldiery were as shocked as everyone else. The involvement of the Ivory and Steel Dragon seemed a personal affront to their honor. Morale within the DCMS crumbled at what should have been their finest hour, the anticipated capture of New Avalon.
Wow. Wow. Something tells me that Jinjiro didn't even really care about honor, about his father or his father's honor or the honor of the whole thing. I think he's just a bloodthirsty murderer, and he just wanted that one excuse to be able to go all out. Oh man. Oh man. And even the Draconis Combine itself, the other factions were horrified with what Iron and Dragon had done, and just felt dishonored. They felt dishonored by that. It really made victory on any chance to go after New Avalon. Not only did it demoralize the whole of the Draconis Combine because of what Jinjiro had done, but now it made New Avalon, any attacks on New Avalon take on a whole different meaning and won't serve what it was supposed to be Minoru Kurita's finest moment. Like, it was supposed to be his father's triumph, and now it's tainted because of what happened on Kintari. Wow, dang. I'm glad Sven Vanderplank actually covered that, especially in great detail. That was a very hard video to find. Because I really wanted to find out what it was since he hyped it, but now seeing that, jeez, man, like, I don't believe one bit that Jinjiro did that for in the name of his father. I think he wanted an excuse to be a bloodthirsty murderer, and he got what he wanted, and at what cost? At what cost for the Draconis Combine?
The question, of course, is why the Kintari massacre caused such outrage. By this point in the First Succession War, tens of billions had already died either as a result of nuclear, biological, or chemical weapons, or from the collapse of the planetary environment that followed. As mentioned, the intelligence agencies and propaganda divisions within each realm were careful to restrict how much information was out there. But rumors of dead or abandoned worlds were fairly common by this point.
Right.
The answer lies in how the actual killing was carried out. Not once during the Kintari massacre were weapons of mass destruction used to eradicate the populace. Jinjiro flat out forbade their use. It's this last point that makes the Kintari massacre such an infamous event in human history. The fact that the brutal slaughter was carried out by thousands of individuals and not at the press of a button elevated it above other war crimes. Having video evidence of the atrocity made it all the more real for those watching, and further fueled the indignation. The coordinator Jinjiro Kurita left Kintari on February 15, 2797 to resume command at the front. In the 5 months of carnage that unfolded under his watchful eye, approximately 90% of the planet's population was wiped out, either by gunshot, sword, or under the mechanical foot of an unfeeling battle mech.
Jeez.
52 million were dead.
Oh my god. Wow, it ends on this? Wow.
And there we go then, the Kintari massacre. I know people have been waiting for this all series.
Yeah.
Absolute psychopaths. Undoubtedly one of the most infamous events in the whole timeline, and one that is going to have very serious ramifications for House Kurita. Nobody quite realizes it yet, but this is going to be the turning point of the Davian versus Kurita war that's going on. This is the first chapter that's covering a little bit more time span in the same kind of 30-minute block. It's going to be the same going forwards from this point right up to the end of the series now. I don't think there's going to be a single chapter now that's anything less than 5 years. Things start happening at a slower pace in one sense, but that just means there's less for us to cover, which means our videos are going to be going at a quicker pace. We're going to try and stick to the 20-30 minute range. That feels like a good number for me. Next time out, we're going to see out the decade,
and for me.
see out the century, heading into the 2800s now. We're going to jump back in time just 1 year and cover what else has been going on while the Kentai massacre is unfolding.
Makes sense.
And as that's happening, you'll start to see news of the massacre filtering through and the reaction to it. It's going to primarily focus on the relatively short reign of the Chancellor Regent. We said, you may remember, that Barbara Liao has passed away and her granddaughter
what happened there?
is too young to take office herself. So the Capellans decide amongst themselves to elect a regent to look after the realm. And not wanting to spoil things, but they go on the absolute warpath. Davian has a lot more than just House Kirita to worry about in the next few years. Minoru Kirita has also become the second of the successor lords to lose his life now on the front lines of the war. And he isn't going to be the last. Next time, we're going to see the death of yet another successor lord and the rise of their own heir who is going to transform the way their realm is governed. I'm almost saddened to say it, but this is really the last major impactful event in the First Succession War. What it really boils down to now for the last 25 years of the conflict is just a relentless grind. I do fear that this might seep into the videos as it all just becomes a bit of a numbers game. But hopefully you can retain your interest throughout the remainder of the series. Thank you very much for watching, everybody.
So we finally made it to what I was waiting for, the Kentai massacre. Everything before it is pretty amazing, and this part here, I gotta say, is a fantastic approach in storytelling, because up until this point, as had been pointed out, there had been planets that were completely irradiated into oblivion with nukes, and a lot of planets had been taken over. There had been massacres left and right, and yet, as was pointed out by Sven Vanderplank, this is the one. This one was the one that outraged everybody and messed up the whole Draconis Combine. You know, and it's pretty it's pretty crazy that this occurred because Minoru Kurita got successfully assassinated by a sniper. A sniper I don't think was noted as having been successfully captured. He just ran off, disappeared, and because the people involved couldn't be found, he just Jinjiro just took it out on everybody. Just took it out on the civilians. And I'm wholly convinced that Jinjiro didn't do it in the name of his father and his father's honor. I think he is a bloodthirsty murderer, and he wanted an excuse to go all out because he can use the excuse of war for the brutality and murder and senseless killing of innocent people. And it was a very interesting question that Vanderplank brought up. Why is it that with the chemical weapons, the nuclear blasts, the orbital bombardments, all that stuff done to the civilian population, why was this one the one to be the one that crosses the line in the eyes of the public across all the houses? And I think simple enough is because nukes. I think it's because the style of combat using nukes and chemical weapons had become normalized with the people. They expect to get nuked. They expect to get hit with chemical weapons. You know? The general populace, you know what I'm saying? It became such a common use weapon not unlike, say, the tanks. So when you think about the tanks, we have tanks, right? Why are we not outraged when tanks get used in war? Why, the area of damage hits somebody and we go, oh my gosh, you know what I'm saying? When war occurs, we don't sit there and say, oh my gosh, that's inhumane. You know what I mean? Because the tank became normalized. Same with the gun. The gun too. You know what I'm saying? The gun is brutally killing people in our timeline, here in our reality, and we don't bat an eye on it. We sit there and say, "Oh my gosh, the poor people," but we don't sit there and go, "Oh my gosh, this is wrong in war." When civilians get caught in the crossfire and everything, we don't scream bloody outrage. Because in war it can happen, saying, and it'll always happen in war, and that's because weapons like the gun and the tank, the submarine, the missiles, they become normalized. We expect those to be used in war. What happened in World War One and why chemical weapons can never get used because would never be used because it wasn't just only the soldiers who got hit, but the civilian population got hit and was hit with impunity. And people seeing the effects of that horrified everybody. That now became a rule, the rules of war. The rules of engagement and a crime of the Geneva Convention, never to use those type of weapons again. Those type of weapons. And but not the tanks. Take this into consideration. The chemical weapons were now deemed against the rules of war, but not the tanks and mortar and so on. You know what I'm saying? Those things still can still be used in war. So in a sense, I guess one can say that that the houses in this context may have had a Geneva type convention agreement, and knowing that since the nukes are the genie out of the bottle type of thing, and they can't just get rid of it, they just normalized it, much like a tank and a submarine and an aircraft carrier and other horrific weaponry. So as Sven pointed out, because it wasn't this is not normal. And I think that's the key factor. This wasn't about just taking over a planet, occupying the people and everything. This was systematic. And being told not to use nukes, must have shocked everybody once the propaganda broke through. Once the propaganda was slapped to the side, and they're sitting there and seeing literal brutality. Like, people were not just being killed instantaneously in a sense, you know what I'm saying? It was, I think what it is that they weren't looking at soldiers, you know what I'm saying? Soldiers who were just serving for the honor of their respective houses. My country, right or wrong. It wasn't that mentality. It was an atrocity. Now they seen an atrocity because they were reveling in it. That's the difference. That's the big difference. Jinjiro, and that's why I say he's not, he didn't do it in the name of his father or for the honor or any of that. He was a bloodthirsty murderer. And he used the war and the conflicts and his father's death as an excuse to revel in the murder of people. And that's what he did with the Iron and Dragon factions. He turned them into bloodthirsty murderers. It was no longer about a soldier's fight and civilians getting caught in the crossfire. This was blatant, inhumane murder, and the soldier was not fighting at all. That's the thing. They weren't fighting the civilians. And the civilians were not fighting back. That's the key thing. Saying it wasn't a fight of honor. You know what I mean? They weren't clashing with the civilians. They were just rounding them up and executing them. And the people across the five houses and in the combine, itself, who felt dishonored, saying who felt the dishonor and the upcoming attack on New Avalon to be tainted, was because they were operating on the notion that they were fighting as soldiers, as warriors, and that their combatants were also of equal, at least in their eyes, from their point of view, were of equal level, soldiers and warriors, and it was a warriors fight. But to see, and sometimes civilians could end up getting killed because that's their mindset. That's the mindset. You know what I'm saying? That's the mindset that that was a soldier's fight, and this is not a soldier's fight. What Jinjiro did on Kintari, and it did anger all the factions. It angered all the factions. It gave inspiration to thousands of resistance groups all across the galaxy, not just only against Kurita, but now. But what Jinjiro did was now he told the civilians that from this point forward, not just us, but others are looking at the other houses. They're sitting there and saying, well, if Jinjiro is willing to do this, who's to say that Steiner won't do it, or Davion won't do it, or Marek won't do it? The others won't do the same. And now the resistant groups are rising up because they don't want this to happen, Kintari. And I'm sure, no doubt, the houses were pissed off that Jinjiro would do something that stupid, and now made them the targets of now an angered civilian population. A civilian population will tolerate so much. Eventually, the population will say enough is enough. Unfortunately, of course, as Sven the Plank pointed out, the war lasts another 25 years. So, unfortunately, clearly the resistant forces didn't do much, make much of a dent or difference. But what Jinjiro did, was an execution. And yes, there were other executions that were done. But again, the propaganda machine was able to suppress those and keep a lot of civilians in the dark. But remember, one other key factor, and I don't think Vanderplank didn't point this out. Okay, as to why this information got out. And that is because Kurita was the one, not Jinjiro specifically, but Minoru Kurita, the house, were the first ones to declare themselves the ruler of the whole world. That they took the throne and they were going to run the whole world. Remember, they were the ones that started this whole thing. Okay, they're the ones that started this whole thing. And Jinjiro's actions on Kintari was very stupid. It's the best way I can put it. He clearly learned nothing. Probably didn't even heed the warnings of his father. If his father tried to tell him to keep things tempered in terms of actions and execution. Somehow Jinjiro forgot who started this whole entire secession war, and that was his father. And all the houses most definitely are not happy with what Minoru did when he came out and declared that he was going to that he took the throne and was going to run the whole galaxy, and the whole galaxy had to run through him. That's what caused the successor war in the first place. And this foolish act that Shinjiro did, this cruel and evil act, this dumb decision he made to go into Kintari and commit this slaughter, gave the houses, the other houses, the opening they need to open up the propaganda, show everybody what has happened, even in Draconis Combine, and put the bullseye on House Kurita's head. They put the bullseye on their head, on the house head. Jinjiro shows why his father was the smarter successor lord. And now any attempts to go and take over New Avalon and thus conquering the whole area is tainted. You know what I'm saying? It's completely tainted now. Well, you know what I'm saying? Because Kurita, whatever Minoru had planned, Jinjiro tainted it. Because he was so dumb enough to do something like this and get caught on camera. Mm-mm-mm. And now to make matters worse, Barbara Liao, if I recall correctly, she's the other successor lord. She died of disease, and her daughter took over. 12 years old, which means they have to get a regent to take over, and that's never ever good in the history of empires, especially here in the real world. In the history of empires, the second the kid ends up being the one that ascends the throne, all sorts of insanity happens. Yeah, I was gonna talk about a little bit more about Scrom, but after seeing what Kurita did, oh man, it's almost like Scrom just has justification for being racist towards Asians after what this guy did. You know, at least from their point of view, it's still gross. You know, it's such a gross excuse because innocent Asians from both the Combine and the Confederated Sons, you know, are going to get hurt by are actually getting hurt by that, you know. But that's the price. That's the price they paid. No, not so much to the civilians or anything, but I'm saying the soldiers, these guys here, you know, these guys here. If these guys complain, you know, Jinjiro, the generals, if they all complain about the racism, they only have themselves to blame because they pushed the people in the position to end up acting racist towards them and hurting the Asians in the process. It didn't have to be. It never had to be. But look at what Jinjiro did to Kentari. You know what he did to Kentari. You know, things like that breeds hatred and racism when it should never exist in the first place. You don't ever want to give racism an excuse, okay? Because racism has no excuses and should never have an excuse. But when you do something like this, you end up giving racism an excuse, and that's the worst thing that could ever happen when racism rears its head. Because then how can you sit there, you know, say it's very easy to say racism is wrong, but when they say that their racism is born from a massacre like this, you know, this type of horror, you know what I'm saying, how do you fight against that? You know, you can't tell people to get over themselves when they learn that their loved ones were butchered in the most horrific way manageable. You know, it's it's always crazy when things like this happen. You know what I'm saying? It's always crazy like this. You know. Oh man. Jinjiro really screwed everything up for House Kurita. They screwed everything up for them. I don't know how they're gonna end up losing, but something tells me they're gonna end up losing big time, and I don't know if that was it was never worth it. It was never worth it to begin with, Jinjiro. Other parts of the war. Very hard to talk about after hearing Kentari, because that definitely is the highlight of the whole thing. You know, the Marek lost two of his grandsons to so that's causing problems. Let's see, the Comstar is trying to preserve history. Trying to preserve the history and helping refugees, keeping track of them and such. That's a very, very tall task. It's crazy. And keep in mind too, just to go back to Jinjiro, he stopped doing his planet hopping so he could torment and hurt the people of the planets that he took before he moved on to the next planet. So that said everything. That was a very good foreshadow on Vanderplank's part leading up to that. And Finnmark from the periphery completely annihilated into oblivion. It doesn't exist anymore, and all of its I guess prefecture planets, its state planets, whatever it is, were just left to rot, as Vanderplank says it. Jeez, man. Jeez, it's just insane. It really is insane, quite honestly. You know, and then they brought out the mercs like Senlo Kwan did. Mm, man, it's jeez, man. I just yeah, yeah. If I was Asian, if I was Asian in this world setting and racism was being inflicted onto me, I wouldn't look to the people who are inflicting racism. I would look to Jinjiro for inciting the racism with those barbarisms that he did, and blame House Kurita, especially if I was in the Federated Sons and was the recipient of the Kuritan attacks. Keep in mind, the Federated Sons were the recipients of Kurita's attacks, and they're being blamed and being racially discriminated against. Yeah, I would look over at Kurita and be like, "Yo, what the hell? You royally screwed us with this." You know? Oh my gosh, man. Jinjiro is an idiot. And I hope that he has comeuppance at the end of the war, and it's the most brutal imaginable, because oh my gosh, man, how you gonna do something like that? You know, he's a bloodthirsty murderer. It had nothing to do with his dad. It had nothing to do with his dad or the honor of the house. He's a bloodthirsty murderer. He did it for the fun, and he got two factions to dishonor themselves by doing it for the fun as well. You know. Let's be real here. It was for the bloodlust, the fun of the bloodlust, you know, entertainment. Gross, very gross. So head on over to Amazon.com and grab yourself a copy of The Impossible Man, a strange fantasy novel written by me. You'll find links to my novel in the description below, along with links to other merch such as pins, stickers, t-shirts, music. Enjoy the products, and thank you for your patronage. And if you happen to have a copy of The Impossible Man and did a lore video on it, thank you very much. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on it. And if you're interested, you could join me on my live multi-stream on Twitch and Kick every Monday through Thursday, 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where I do lore research, Japanese cultural studies, gaming, and more. Thank you all. I look forward to hanging out with all of you. Gosh, man, I still got this in my head. Thank you all for joining me until the next round of BattleTech Mech Warrior Research. Thank you all for joining me, and I wish you all a good night, buenas noches, and oyasumi nasai.